Hello everybody! Welcome to Creating the Basic Adaptable Game Engine Library, Part 8, Rectangle Class Design. Before we actually jump into writing the code for the rectangle class, I'd like to spend a few minutes just talking about some of the design choices that are going into this class and how they relate to the theoretical concepts we talked about in the previous video. So let's head over and take a look at the Java documentation for this class that we're about to write. So as we've mentioned before, a rectangular shape will be defined by its position and size. And that's 4 numbers altogether. The position are the coordinates of the top left corner, and the size is the width and the height of the rectangle. And as we mentioned, it's particularly useful for collision detection to determine when 2 objects overlap. Although, in the future, we will find other uses for this class as well, and we'll update this comment accordingly. It turns out there's actually going to be 6 variables we're going to store in the rectangle class: the top left corner coordinates, the size, but to make the code a little bit more readable, we'd also like to store the bottom and right sides of the rectangle as well. And so those will be calculated when we set the top left width and height values. So there will actually be 6 fields in this rectangle. And in addition, to make sure that the bottom and right sides of the rectangle get updated, we're going to make all these different fields in the class private. That way, we ensure that we have control over our data. Whenever we set the values, we want to use a method rather than accessing a public variable directly. If we use a set method, that ensures that we have the chance to update all the necessary values. So, at first, there's not going to be too much code in here. Right? We're going to have 2 constructors. There will be a default constructor, which will initialize all the values to 0, and the parameterized constructor, where you can speak about the top left coordinates of the rectangle and the width and the height. And it's a little bit confusing sometimes, not a lot, but a little confusing. We often talk about the top left corner of the rectangle, but the order of these arguments will be the left coordinate and then the top coordinate. Because the left coordinate is the x value, the top coordinate is the y value at that particular point, and usually we talk about x before y. And so those are the parameters. And again, we'll have 2 different methods at first. We'll have a set values method, which will create where we can set the left top width and height, and that will update the rectangle data, including the hidden fields bottom and right. In particular, we might need to change some of these values. Right? So this is particularly useful for objects which are moving. Objects which are solid and stationary, we'll set the values once through the constructor and we'll never need to call this. But again, it'll be useful to potentially set these values. In theory, you might also want to create a method called setPosition or another method called setSize in case you want to just update the left and top values or the width and height values. And finally, the most interesting of all the methods will be the overlaps method. This will naturally return a Boolean value, either true or false, if this rectangle does or does not overlap another rectangle, which we'll call other. All right, and that's all we're going to need for this first pass at the class. In the next video, we'll actually start writing the code for this class.